We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Wait a minute, Maine Prepper, you just mispronouncified that word. Well, I probably did. It's a deliberate one. However, it did not change the meaning of it. And why did I say it that way? One of my subscribers explained this to me very carefully, and I agree. And so I'm going to begin using it that way, and that's permissible because I'm not changing the meaning of the word. I'm simply trying to differentiate between unalienable and inalienable. And the reason that I'm pronouncing it that way is so that when I'm talking, if there is a misunderstanding in my speech and I don't have the word written down behind me, you'll understand I'm talking about this top one, unalienable. Well, what is the difference between the two? First, to begin with, this word unalienable means that the right, in regards of rights, means that that right cannot be transferred, it cannot be taken away, it cannot be modified away by someone, it cannot be explained away. That right belongs to whoever it is bestowed upon. And so, if as in the Declaration of Independence, it states quite clearly, are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, then that means that those rights are in fact given by God, and the only person that can take them away is God. Now I know that we have certain people in political office as well as the public sector that believe they are God, or at least they behave themselves as though they answer to no one but Him and the rest of us are beneath them. That doesn't mean they are. Declaring yourself something doesn't make you one. Inalienable is different. Inalienable means they can be transferred. For instance, if you have a title to a vehicle, that could be considered a good analogy. A title is an inalienable one. It is given to you and it can only be taken away from you or transferred by you either with your permission or by legal action. For instance, if someone places a lien on your vehicle for failure to pay for the mechanical work on the vehicle, the court may decide, yes, we're going to take that person's vehicle away and give it to the mechanic in exchange for the auto body repair or whatever was done on it. But unalienable or unalienable means can't be taken away, right? So that should be fairly clear to all of us, I hope. What are some examples of our unalienable rights? Well, I'm glad you asked. The Constitution of the United States has 10 amendments. The first 10 amendments called the Bill of Rights. Those rights were written deliberately and specifically in the way that they were because it was necessary in order to ratify our Constitution, which happened in 1789. And the reason the states wouldn't ratify is because they feared the potential of a strong central government being taken over by a tyrant and his power being wielded against these separate states. As such, the amendments therefore seek to enumerate the unalienable rights of every citizen. Now, the 9th and 10th Amendments specify something a little different than enumerating a specific set of rights. What they say, the 9th Amendment, essentially, and I paraphrase, is that any right not mentioned here in this Bill of Rights does not necessarily not exist. It means that these are but some of the ones that we absolutely want to make sure that everybody's crystal clear on, because there have been numerous times in the past history where people have infringed upon these unalienable rights of the citizens. So we want to make sure that we nail this down because we know there will be tyrants. You see, that's right. They wrote these not because they knew the victory was won and the battle was done. They knew rather that this would be an ongoing fight for eternity, because history proved that you could fix something, but the tyrants were always coming back and getting themselves into power one way or the other. And that's why they put these options for us in here in the amendments to make sure that when the tyrant came back, we would have the tools with which to hem them in and defeat them. So, and by the way, the 10th Amendment says that any power not specifically granted to the government, that's right, granted, not rights, power granted to the government does not exist, and they cannot make it up. Now, that doesn't mean they can't interpret things, and we have to because our society is modernized in many ways, and so we've had to essentially modernize some of this so that we can cover down on things. For instance, we did not know there would be nuclear power, so we needed to create a nuclear regulatory commission to manage that. Otherwise, power plants would be cropping up everywhere made out of garbage cans full of depleted uranium or something crazy like that, because there'd be no regulation on it. But because of that, we read this into the Commerce Clause, I believe, and that allows us to create one of those entities. That being said, we do get into some dangerous ground, and I'm not going to open up that can of worms right now. So, unalienable rights are those that cannot be taken away. Inalienable rights are ones that can be. There's a difference, and you'll see people trying to say these two words are synonymous. Be careful when they do, because when they do, they're trying to backdoor some, or if not, all of your rights. Because if they can transfer in your mind the idea that your rights can be taken away from you, that they're not unalienable, but they are inalienable, they're the same thing, they're not, then they're going to have a foothold with which to strip you of your rights. Let me explain to you, in fact, the chain of custody on our rights. Now I'm going to stand up, and there's two ways to look at this. Either the blackboard was too short or I'm too tall. Pick one. Our rights, where do they come from? According to the Declaration of Independence, they come from God. All right, or Creator, whichever one you choose. I'll use God because it's easier to write. Don't get wrapped around the axle, please, on this. If you are agnostic or atheistic, I don't mean to insult you. This is simply by way of illustration and also clarity. I'll stick to the simple things because this is how the Founding Fathers chose to write it. Creator or God. Enumerated rights. Human beings. Let's just say humans. I could say man. I'll go ahead and write humans. What the heck? Man would have been shorter. Okay, humans. God gives rights directly to humans. These are unalienable rights. That means the only person that could take these away, possibly, would be God. And I don't read anywhere that He has except in our death. And even then, some of these rights may still transfer with you. But nonetheless, these rights, you can't give these rights to anybody else. You can't turn around and say, well, I have the right to keep and bear arms, so I'm going to give these rights to my dog. You can't do that. You're not allowed to transfer these rights to anybody. But in case of our Declaration of Independence, the human beings. If you're an American and you believe in this concept, by the way, it doesn't just apply to Americans, it applies to everyone. It's hypocritical of us to say that we're the only humans that God gave rights to, because the Declaration of Independence quite clearly says all men are created equal. It doesn't mean that only Americans are equal. It means that all men are equal. That means when you go someplace to another country, you don't look at people that don't speak English as being less a human being than you. Unfortunately, some folks do have that attitude. They're called ugly Americans. Don't do that. It's a poor example of a way to behave. Where does government come into play in this? That's a good question. Some people assert the following, and this is how divine right of kings worked, but it's also how a lot of modern day interpretations are working out by some people, especially those in positions of, quote, authority and power in the government. They believe that God gives these rights down to government, or in the case of kings, the divine right of kings, and therefore they could look at the rights and say, I'm going to give you the right to do this. I'm going to allow you the right to keep and bear arms, and that's going to be a right that comes from your government. There are many governments in the world that have done this. This is inappropriate. This is incorrect. This is how tyrants get their foothold in, and that's why we have to hold the line on unalienable versus inalienable. All right, so this is not correct. This is the wrong way to do it. And if you allow things to be done in this fashion, then you are opening the door for a tyrant to get in. People will say, well, wait a minute, you can't just give people rights. These are the folks that want to infringe on the Second Amendment because they don't trust other folks. That means usually when someone has that kind of a mindset, they can't be trusted, just saying. So there is no middleman in between here. There's God to man. Wait a minute, we have government. Yes, we do. Government has a twofold responsibility in this. Government's first responsibility is to guarantee this. So government has a responsibility here on this end only to make sure that these rights are not interfered with, that no person comes in here and says, I'm only going to allow some people to have these rights. I'm only going to let a handful of people. You have to be the right color. You have to be the right religion to have these rights. No, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence quite clearly declare that to be wrong. What's the other responsibility the government has? They have a responsibility as well, alternatively, to monitor the output of people that when people have their rights and they use them, they have a right and they have a responsibility, the government does, they have a mandate to make sure that we use our rights responsibly. For instance, you're allowed to keep and bear arms uninfringed. However, if you go out and you commit a crime with them, then the government has a responsibility to essentially punish you for that and to do what it can to prevent you from doing it further. It should never, however, say, well, in order to prevent improper use of weapons, we're going to go ahead and just restrict and remove that right because after all, nobody needs it anyway, etc. No, that is absolutely incorrect. In fact, nothing is supposed to touch those. The word unalienable is pretty clear on that. So that's not a solution that's allowable. It is a solution, just like going out and mass murdering people you don't agree with is a solution to dealing with them. However, both of these solutions are unconscionable and should not even be mentioned. The fact that they are being mentioned says more about the lack of character of those saying it than anything else. There you have it, folks. That is how it works. God gives unalienable rights to man. Government has a responsibility to guarantee these rights, to protect them, to encircle them, to ensure that everyone gets them. And then they have a minor role of ensuring that these are not abused. Folks, this has been the Maine Prepper, and I wanted to give this little dissertation and discussion to you so that you would be well armed and well informed when you go out and you try to explain to people how our unalienable rights work. Thank you so much. I'm very proud of you. And by the way, those of you that are arguing in favor of the Second Amendment and those of you that are fighting against gun control are, I believe, going to see a startling victory. I say startling because the response and the stand-up by the gun owners in this country has been amazing. I am overwhelmed by the number of people that have taken political action, that have contacted your representatives and senators and voted on things. I was not expecting to see what I did, and nor I think were the GCs, the gun controllers. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful Saturday, and maybe I'll see some of you in the gym.